Today I'm going to teach you how to refinish a coffee table. There's a few different things that we're going to need. We're going to need some sandpaper. I have a pad sander and a belt sander. I have 80 grit, 120 grit, 220 grit, and 320 grit sandpaper. We're going to need a stain of your choice, as well as a paintbrush. We're going to need clean rags to wipe off sawdust, and then some sort of clear coat or protective coat to go over it when we're done. Here I am hand sanding with some 80 grit sandpaper, making sure to go with the grain, not against the grain, to avoid any unnecessary damage to the wood. The entire goal of sanding is to create a nice even surface for us to apply our stain. Keeping the wood intact is one of the primary goals of refinishing the wood. You don't want to bring out your big guns first. That's why I started with the hand sanding, and then I bring out the pad sander to see if I can get through this lacquer that's on this table. And as you can see, the pad sander's having quite a difficult time getting through that clear coat protective finish. After giving the pad sander a shot, I decided that it's time to bring out the big guns. I get my belt sander with some 80 grit sandpaper on it, and as you can see, it's a lot more effective as far as taking that paint and that protective coat off. Now I want to use the belt sander as little as possible. You can see how effective it is at getting through that layer of paint and protective coating. And once I'm through that, I'm going to start stepping my way back down to using the pad sander and then getting back to hand sanding to protect that wood the best that I can. Here I start sanding on the other side of the table. I notice there's some discoloring of the wood. It's probably the reason why they painted it black and put a bulletproof lacquer on it. But I'm trying to get through that discoloration and try to get the most even finish that I can. Here you can see that the wood is discolored from this angle a little bit better, but I'm going to prioritize keeping the wood intact rather than sanding all the way down through that. I think that the stain is going to be able to cover most of that up. I don't want a really uneven surface on the top of my table. And now a word from the sponsor of today's video, patience, because it's a fucking virtue. Here is where I make the transition from 80 grit sandpaper to 120 grit sandpaper. Move on to 220 grit sandpaper, just constantly moving to finer and finer sandpaper, getting a smoother finish over the whole table. Finally, I move on to the 320 grit sandpaper, getting a very smooth, almost glass-like finish over this entire table. Then you're going to want to wipe down the entire table with a clean rag. Make sure that you get all the sawdust off of it. And now it's finally time to stain. You got to take a flathead screwdriver, crack your can open. And then when you start to apply the stain, you want to apply it with the grain the same way that you sand. That helps the stain get into all the wood grain, and you can see that there's a little bit of a repelling effect happening here. I'm getting some bubbles here in the stain, which tells me that I'm gonna have to take a rag and I'm gonna have to rub this first bit of stain into the wood to fill all those pores so that I can get a nice even coat. You want to let that first coat of stain dry really well, and then you want to go over the whole table with fine grit sandpaper. I'm using 320 grit sandpaper again, and I'm just getting rid of any darker areas, trying to make the whole finish nice and even before we apply our final stain. And again, we're going to go with the grain, and the goal here is to get an even coat over the whole table. When applying your clear coat, you want to make sure that it's nice and evenly spread. That way you get a uniform finish. Once that clear coat dries, you can enjoy your new table.